Lindsay. Let's get right to two people who've been covering this since the trial started. You've seen them before. NBC's Stephen Romo, NBC News legal analyst Misty Marris with us as well. Stephen, can you start out with the big picture, the arguments that we heard, closing arguments today, lasting a while? What were the themes? Yeah, in Massachusetts, we hear from the defense first, and we heard defense attorney Kevin Reddington really going after these systemic failures that he pointed to. He slammed the police investigation. He slammed prosecutors for what he called manipulating the evidence, and slammed the mental health care system and all the various medications that Lindsay got throughout her treatment. But then he really focused on some core arguments, including that he says this was a psychiatric collapse that Lindsay Clancy suffered and not something that she planned. He also pointed out the many times that she sought help and the many different providers she went to seeking help for her anxiety and her depression. And he basically ended it by pointing out that he believes the Commonwealth just did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that these were three first-degree murders. Let's listen to more of what he said on the stand.
You heard the testimony. You know her concerns. You know her fears. Does this seem like a young lady that didn't care and wanted to score more drugs off somebody? That's another repulsive allegation. I think the evidence is pretty clear. There's no basis for that at all.
Now, as for the prosecution, they really tried to focus in on the night that Lindsay did kill her children, which, of course, the defense side has conceded to, saying that mental health care is not on trial here, recognizing what this conversation has become about, saying that Lindsay Clancy was struggling with depression, yes, but she was in control and knew what she was doing. She knew the difference between right and wrong when she did kill the children. Now, they point out to Lindsay Clancy sending her then husband, Patrick, out to run errands and not telling him what she was doing when they spoke by phone as evidence that she did know what she was doing was wrong. And they raised doubt about that voice that we've heard so much about, pointing out that when Patrick Clancy found her that night, she did not mention a voice. Instead, she mentioned that she tried to take her own life and that the children were in the basement, and that she planned and carried out, even if that voice were real, that she had planned and carried out so many different steps that the voice was not telling her what to do by her own account of it, that she had to decide what manner to use to kill the children, where to do it, how to do it, and really breaking down that they say that their experts have said as well that that would just be very unusual for a state of psychosis. Let's listen to prosecutors.
So why did she specifically do it? She was depressed. She was exhausted. She was done. She didn't want to try anymore. She felt damaged. But those kids were her protective factor. Those kids were keeping her from ending her misery. And so she had to remove the protective factor. And I'm not saying she was happy about it. I'm saying that it was what she had to do to end her misery. But it was a choice.
So quite a different tone there than we heard from prosecutors' opening statements, but you see it there. They are saying she was clearly suffering.
Misty, can I ask for your analysis of both of these sides? Let's start with the defense because they went first. They ripped into the prosecution. He called the prosecution's case a mess. He cited a witness who said she did hear voices. They talked a lot about psychosis. What stood out to you?
So the themes that the defense brought for the closing arguments, first, that this was a result of lousy medical care and medications, that the burden of proof never shifts from prosecutors. Motive. What is the possible motive? There isn't one. The only plausible and logical explanation is that there was this mental health crisis, pointing to prosecution witnesses who testified that Lindsay Clancy was a loving mother but was struggling with mental health issues. And then this point on manipulation by the prosecutors. So the defense went back to that opening statement where the narrative had really shifted and changed throughout the trial, pointed that out and said the prosecutors are cherry picking different pieces of evidence and mischaracterizing it to your jury. They're manipulating what their story is and what their narrative is. So you should not believe them. So those were the large themes for the defense.
Let's talk about the prosecution then. So they did not dispute that Lindsay Clancy is, or in their words, was suffering from mental illness, but they argued that she had access to more treatment than most people do. They said that she did not report hearing voices, that she's functioning as a mom, able to know the difference between right and wrong. And then they focused on the timeline of that actual day. Why was that important?
The focus on the timeline is the legal standard is different than the medical diagnosis. Did she know the difference between right and wrong, and could she control her actions? So that timeline, prosecutors say, she had to make a lot of different cognizant and cogent decisions in order to follow through with the killing in such a truncated period of time, roughly 20 minutes. And in order to show all of those decisions, the prosecutor went through in great detail. They said the planning began at 4 p.m. that day, and she continued to follow through with her plan, getting Patrick out of the house. So all of that really honing in on the timing, the timeline, and why that shows that she knew the difference between right and wrong.
In the prosecution's view. Stephen, the jurors are in there listening to all of this. I know you weren't inside the courtroom, but we have people who were. What did they see in terms of reaction?
Yeah, our Emily Aketa in the courtroom for this. Jurors, as you can imagine, they're people. They're not supposed to take emotion into account as they're deciding this verdict, but you can't help it listening to the accounts of how these 3 young children died. We know that they were showing emotion, a couple of them reportedly tearing up during this. We know family, of course, watching this teared up, and Lindsay herself was seen shaking from behind, obviously getting emotional, hearing yet again the details on that night back in January of 2023 when these young children lost their lives.
Yeah, it's horrific when you think about it. Misty, based on what you've heard or seen of juror reaction, what would you expect is happening now in that deliberation room? How long are we maybe looking at before a decision comes?
So jurors are actually not allowed to talk about the case until they get into that deliberation room. Right. So the jurors have seen this whole trial play out. They might not even know what the others in the jury box are thinking about it, what their perception is. So a lot of times it all starts with a poll. Where's everybody leaning? But this case, the verdict sheet is interesting because manslaughter is on there too. So you've got first-degree murder, second-degree murder, manslaughter, which is reckless disregard of a known risk, and then no criminal culpability, which is essentially the insanity defense.
Which was just added, right? Manslaughter wasn't initially going to be a choice for this jury, but now it is.
Right, and the defense asked for it, making the argument that if the jury were not to believe that Lindsay Clancy was in a state of psychosis, her medications and other mental health issues could have impacted her state of mind. That, Kate, is why you heard prosecutors leaning into misuse of medication, failing to report certain issues with regard to homicidal ideations or wanting to harm the children to the doctors. Their argument is going to be that she left that stuff out and it was a reckless disregard for a known risk. So it fits this other legal theory, which is kind of in the middle. Could you see a compromise verdict?
Interesting. And Stephen, the jury themselves, what do we know about who they are in terms of demographics?
Yeah, it started with 18 jurors. We know there were 12 women and 6 men originally. Now they are chosen at random. There are 9 women and 3 men who make up the 12 jurors who will ultimately decide this. The county clerk actually picks at random from that main pool, but the numbers pan out. It's interesting to think of women in this. We've heard so much from women standing outside supporting Lindsay in this, how that will come into play here.
Well, and on that note, to either of you, how are they going to deal with this when a verdict does come down? Because look at that crowd outside.
Yeah, there's so much attention on this case.
There really is. We've seen there is more security, of course, than there would normally be at the courthouse. But from all accounts, things have been remarkably peaceful. As far back as the first rally, the demonstration that they had there, it was a standing in silence. They weren't chanting. You see them there. They're holding hands. So things do seem peaceful right now. It's very unclear, though, what could happen. But we know there is additional law enforcement.
If you had to guess, Misty, are we waiting for days?
I think it's going to go into next week. They got, the jury got everything today. Deliberations started around roughly 1 o'clock. So tomorrow will be their first full day of deliberations. There's a lot of complex issues, a lot of evidence, a lot to go through.
Misty Marris, Stephen Romo, great to have you both for all this analysis. Thank you.